Good day, class. Welcome to my little lesson here on bias. This is Professor Dick. We're going to go over something that's really not covered in the course content. Basically, why you and I are biased. So is everyone else. So as we explore this, let's take a look at this idea of bias. First of all, bias is defined as a noun and a verb. The noun, an inclination of temperament or outlook, especially a personal and sometimes unreasoned judgment, prejudice. Systemic error introduced into sampling or testing by selecting or encouraging one outcome or answer over another or others. We see that all the time. Definitions of verb, it's a transitive verb. To give a settled and often prejudiced outlook to his background biases him against foreigners. So we can see how it's borne out like that, instead of saying a bias, it biases you. So those are some of the ways it's used. We see this all the time from everybody. I'm not biased. Well, you are, and so am I, and it matters. What is bias? Bias is a natural inclination for or against an idea, object, group, or individual. It's often learned and it's highly dependent on variables like a person's social economic status, race, ethnicity, educational background, etc. At the individual level, bias can negatively impact someone's personal and professional relationships. At a societal level, it can lead to an unfair persecution of a group, such as the Holocaust and slavery. Can a person be unbiased? Generally, no. Now, you have people claiming, oh, I'm not biased. That's not true. Everyone has some degree of bias. It's human nature to assign judgment based on first impressions. Also, most people have a lifetime of conditioning by schools, religious institutions, families of origin, media, the people around them. Your experiences give into your bias. However, by reflecting critically on judgments and being aware of blind spots, individuals can avoid stereotyping and acting on harmful prejudice. Now, let me go on with a little disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist. So when we talk about bias, there's multiple things. There's whole lesson plans around bias. We're not even going to go near all that. We're going to stick to the basic bias that we deal with here in the historian level. And it's said a lot of times historians need to check their bias at the door before they write history. Or teachers need to check their bias at the door. Okay, let's do the opposite. How come nobody ever says students need to check their bias at the door? Or the person reading about history needs to check their bias before they read history. Aren't they really saying that we can get rid of bias? Can we? We just said generally no. Every single person comes into social spaces with biases. And they're birthed out of stories that you've heard, experiences you may have had, and especially in a media-saturated society, perceptions of others are sort of imbibed and described to us by stories in the media. When we say media, oh, media. So don't be sitting there going, oh, CNN, you're biased. Nah, Fox, you're biased. Nah. All media is biased. It's just reality. Your bias is part of you, but it is something you can actively work on to change or mitigate to some degree. Now, the first step in doing this is to acknowledge you are biased in the first place about everything. Bias is shaped by a person's experiences, what they see, what they hear, what they feel, and what they learn. It can be conscious, but it is also subconscious. You have to be aware of the fact that bias exists. And again, if you're going to say bias does not exist, just shut this thing off and move on because you're wasting your time. Everyone is biased. You are, and so am I. Now, the bias that we're going to be working with mostly in this little lesson here, and the one we see the most in these type classes, is confirmation bias. So we go look at our cartoon here. In psychology and cognitive science, confirmation bias or confirmatory bias is a tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms one's preconceptions, leading to statistical errors. Those things shows everything you look for and all that you perceive is a way of proving whatever you believe. Now, look at this little chart thing. This has nothing to do with politics again. So just the left side says what the facts are. The right side what confirms your bias. It's just a little oval chart. The left shows undervalued because of these are the facts. The right is foolish because it what confirms your beliefs. And where it intersects, the two circles overlap, is the overvalued area of confirmation bias, only accepting what confirms your beliefs and rejecting everything else to support your beliefs. What is confirmation bias? It's also known as motivated reasoning. It refers to the brain's tendency to search for and focus on information that supports what someone already believes, while ignoring facts that go against those beliefs despite their relevance. It can be conscious and subconscious, all right? So sometimes you'll be looking for sources and you'll find stuff that confirms your bias. Oh, this looks good, I'll take this. And you're not thinking about it. Your subconscious is kind of kicking in. You have to be kind of aware. Hey, wait a minute. Where's something that disagrees with me? Why does it do this? And you're looking for sources that have their roots in other sources. You're looking for stuff that is backed up with factual information. This is where we use a lot of primary sources. And we look for perspectives. Did the historian have a perspective? Did they use the primary sources? If they did not, it doesn't matter. That's probably not even a historian at that point. If primary sources aren't used, you can just pick up the source and check it. You're done. This is also why we go to tertiary sources like history.com and ThoughtCo and Wikipedia. Great places to go look, get a little overview. Don't ever use them in academic sources. They're just not academic sources. You can't use them for that. You can go and see if they have other sources. A lot of times you find in these conglomerate warehouses things, they don't have any sources listed. So when you see that, they're not that good. These are temporary things. They're just little compository repositories. They're just useful for a few things. Like I said, it's a great starting point, but you can't use it in academic work. Now, I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and in his master classes, he's got this one about scientific thinking, communication, and I'm just trying to get the time to sit down and take this class. I've got a lot of credits, college credits in college teaching and learning. I love learning. I really focus on it, and it just dovetails in with thinking. And how do we think? So sometimes it gets into psychology, but Tyson gets into this course, and he's got some things he says in here, and just, oh, it's so powerful. So this is the trailer for the course. And I'm not plugging the course. Just, I want you to understand that, this is a guy who's pretty damn smart, if you get right down to it. And he's talking about some concepts. Yeah, he's talking about scientific thinking, but it applies to us, especially when he talks about confirmation bias. So let's see what Neil says to us.
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. There's like a gazillion hours of me on the internet. In almost every case, I'm talking about the universe, black holes, the Big Bang, time travel, God. But what I'm going to do in this masterclass is teach you how to think. The goal here is to train your mind how to see the world differently, how to question what others say. I've come to realize that there are three categories of truth: personal truth, political truths, and the objective truths that shape our understanding of the universe. The interesting thing about an objective truth is that it's true no matter what. Imagine that. By the time we're done, you will be equipped with some of the methods and tools so you can turn data into information, information into knowledge, knowledge into wisdom. We all have susceptibility to bias. Search engines on the internet are the epitome of confirmation bias. And you're going to use that as evidence that you are correct? No. The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it. What does it mean to be skeptical? What does it mean to be convinced by data? A proper skeptic questions what they're unsure of, but recognizes when valid evidence is presented to change their mind. I will equip you to not only find objective truths, but then communicate to others how to get there. It's not good enough to be right. You also have to be effective. The less connected you are to what is objectively true, the less likely you will be able to make decisions that will benefit your life, the life of your family, and even civilization itself. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, and this is my masterclass.
And I just love this thing here. These master classes are so cool. Just I want to take several of them, and I just can't do all of them at once. This one here about thinking. This is one that I'm definitely going to be taking here in a few more months. I've just got to get a couple of things taken care of. Search engines on the internet are the epitome of confirmation bias. Wow. Search engines work certain ways. They tend to go with what we are looking for, and they tend to confirm what we're trying to believe, what we want to believe. It tells us what we want to hear. We need to be historians. We need to be detectives. We need to pull up the rock and then pull up the rock beneath the rock and look underneath it. We have to be looking for more sources, more perspectives. We do this all the time. We have to keep searching. One source does not confirm anything. We need more sources, and that's what we're looking at for you to do. And the problem that we run into is people want to just take, oh, this supports what I want to believe. You can't do that, because invariably you're going to be wrong. Be skeptical. Question what you're unsure of. Recognize when valid evidence has been presented to change your mind. Example, bias in history, the Crusades. We see two perspectives here, and there's a lot of perspectives. Just simple ones along religious lines. Islamic, Christian. Why did the Crusades start? Who started the Crusades? Who is correct? What side won? 4 simple questions. Note the all start with W. But the answer is going to depend on the perspective, and neither perspective is wrong. They are both valid. Requires us to look, to get the history. If I say, oh, King Richard III went on a crusade, he was great taking down the infidel, and he won these important battles, defeating his enemies. And I give a little bit more detail, but I've already used the knowledge. He's slaughtering the infidels. Well, there's a Christian perspective. What about the Islamic perspective? Who's the infidel now? But yet both sides worship the same God. Interesting how the religion gets involved in these things. So we see the perspectives of the Crusades, just 2 simple perspectives here, wildly, radically different, and how they're going to see. And so the history written from these perspectives is going to be totally different. The same things are going to happen, the same events, but how and why they happen and the terminology used is going to be totally different. And it's going to shape people's opinions. Yet if you want to write a truly reflective history of the Crusades, you need to read and recognize both perspectives. And the problem is, if you try to do that, neither audience that you're seeking to buy your book will want to do that, because they want to see something that confirms their bias. History is an interpretive discipline, and that's not something that should worry us. Years back, we had a little fight over the AP history test, where some people were mad because it wasn't going to reflect what they wanted people to believe. Yet the problem was, these people were not historians. They were just trying to pass their historical beliefs about the United States. They wanted that to be handed down. And so they were mad at the historians, or the people doing the test, of course, the teachers, because they were changing how the test was being given and some of the questions on it. And the problem was, the history didn't change, it's the presentation of it. And they didn't like the fact that certain things weren't being presented the way they wanted them. Okay, the thing is, though, the people who were complaining were not historians. And it turned out the whole thing was being underdriven, when you got into the perspectives, by somebody who wrote the guide to the AP history test, because the changes to the test invalidated their guides completely. And it was all about money when you got down to the bottom line. How about that? When you really dig down and turn up that other rock into the rock, look, it's about money. turns out that history didn't change. It's still presented, and the kid, those of you who have taken it, or maybe haven't, I don't know, it's still the same. It didn't change at all. But the guides would change. The guy's guides became invalidated. Yeah, there's the other perspective. So that's the part about looking for more sources. And of course, the guy, when you get into it, said, well, that doesn't do anything. We're like, okay, but if your guide is not invalidated, if it works, then this isn't a problem. Yeah, but I have to write all this new stuff and I can't use my guide because you're changing everything. Yeah, but that's not it. It's you're supposed to be actually, he had a system for getting around to AP history class itself, more or less. And we were like, that's not what we want. We were wanting more stuff on the essay level, whether you understood history or not. He wanted everything to stick to the multiple choice angle, where they were memorizing answers. Memorization doesn't teach history. Essays, that's where you know if they learned or not. Through the investigation of a variety of sources and requirements, the students must develop their own arguments based on relevant evidence. We can acknowledge that everyone has his or her own perspective and every situation has its own context. So instead of only having the teacher and perhaps a textbook as a source for the study, historians can now take advantage of multiple sources of information and with careful analysis have the opportunity to make a reasoned and informed explanation of the past. Here we see bias or perspective and bias rule. And what's really interesting, they both say the same thing. So most evidence that historians analyze is biased in one way or another. Okay, this is a given fact. All the sources that you pick up are going to have a bias in them, primary and secondary. The source represents a certain perspective from a person or group. Historians use these guidelines when reviewing evidence from the past. Again, every piece of evidence and every source must be read and viewed skeptically and critically. Evidence must not be taken at face value. The author's point of view must be considered. What's their bias? Because there is one. Each piece of evidence and source must be cross-checked and compared with related sources. All right, so if somebody writes a primary source, they're shaping it based on how they saw an event that they participated in. That's the primary source. Somebody writes a secondary source. They're writing about this event that took place in the past based on the perspectives of the sources, the people who wrote about the past, based on those perspectives. That's what you're doing. You're writing a paper and you're looking at all these other sources. So let's take the Civil War. Why did people fight in the Civil War? You read 3 letters. Hey, there's why people fought in the Civil War. There's only, a couple million guys fought in the Civil War. 3 may not be very representative of, 2 million people. Maybe you should read 25,000 letters. And maybe that's still not going to be all the answers, but that's kind of more representative. 25,000 is far more representative of 2 million people than 3. James McPherson wrote a book, Why the Men Fought in the Civil War. And he read the 25,000 plus letters, stacks of them, cited from them. I read the book. He's got evidence out the wazoo. And he sat there and said, here we go. And everybody had a valid, these are the perspectives of these people. Every one of them was valid. And so he cataloged them, started sorting them into which side, if you want to say sides, perspectives that they were using, narrowed it down quite a bit, said, okay, this is it. And, why they fought. And there's tons of reasons why guys fight, like why people join the service. I was in the service, and I can tell you right now, I was kind of shocked when I first got in. And why did you join? There were 20 of us sitting in this one little bowl session, and there were 20 different reasons for why we joined. I'm like, well, everybody just like me? No, they're not. Surprise, surprise. And so, like, why did people fight in the Civil War? Oh, wow, that gets deep fast. That's not to say that's the reason for the Civil War. That's a whole nother topic, which can get more interesting in itself. But again, we see bias in historical sources. We see that there is bias present in all the sources, and therefore we need to go get a lot of sources. You at the stage are a beginning junior historian or junior detective. You don't have the time to do all these sources. You're writing, you're learning how to do this. And that's what we're trying to get you to do, is learn and to use sources. A lot of people don't want to use sources. And I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to cover that just a bit. But I do want to mention, you have this worksheet, the ARIA worksheet. You're able to evaluate sources with that worksheet, both primary and secondary. Use that worksheet. Evaluate the sources. Think like a historian. If it seems too good to be true, it is. If it doesn't have sources, like a secondary source that doesn't use any primary sources, I'm going to tell you what to do with it right now. Pick it up, hold it over the trash can, drop it into the trash can. That's the value it has, not. If it's confirming what you already believe, look for more sources. Then if it's something that disagrees with you, why does it disagree? Is it a primary source? If it's a primary source that disagrees with you, keep it. If it's a secondary source, why does it disagree with you? Maybe it's right and you're wrong. If there's a bunch of them that disagree with you, is it about perspective, or is it because they're using facts that you're not looking at? Maybe you don't like the primary sources that they're using. Doesn't matter. You need to go through those primary sources and understand the perspectives behind that. Why did those change or shape the perspective of the people who wrote the secondary source? If you're not going to do that, then you're going to have a biased opinion. Be aware of bias. Here we have a Dilbert cartoon, and this is going to finish it up. I'm going to close out. I've taught History 100 for a while now. And finally, I quit completely accepting topics about gun control, pro or con. Sick of them. History 100 gives you 3 topics. I asked you all to select from the 8 case studies, and there's a reason why I did that. I wanted you to keep it simple. I wanted you to learn more about what history is and how to apply it. And there's a lot of sources available to you that are academic, that are in the content from MindEdge, they're in the content from the Superior Library. I wanted you to be able to do that and learn about the process of being a historian. There's a simple reason for that. Gun control, and I don't care what side, if any, you take on this issue. Okay, that's immaterial to the argument. All right, we all have our opinion. We all have our bias about gun control. That's fine. I'm not here to argue that issue. The reason why I quit letting the students select gun control is because I got nothing back but bias. Person says, I want to select gun control because following reasons. I'm pro-gun. Another person says, I'm going to select gun control for the following reasons. I'm anti-gun. All right. Said, be objective. You know, don't be subjective. Don't let it confirm your bias. And I gave them a lesson on bias and stuff. And I get these presentations back. And only sources in it are tertiary sources and sources that confirm what they want to believe. Nothing from the other side. So I had somebody who was, anti-gun control, just hated the idea of gun control at all. I said, okay, you pick from the NRA and all these sources that, all 5 of them that confirm your bias. What about the Brady campaign? Did you look at them for any sources? Oh, I didn't even go there. Them people are anti-gun. Can't use anything they say. Okay, why? Why are you not using something that doesn't support your belief? Well, they're wrong. Okay, you saying they're wrong, but what proves them wrong? Well, they're just wrong. If you're anti-gun, you're anti-American. What proof do you have to support this opinion that you have? And it's the same thing over and over and over again. There is no objective truth to support their opinion whatsoever. Flip to the anti-gun people. Same thing. They won't consider anything that doesn't support their bias either. So I got 2 sides who refuse to even talk to each other, who refuse to use any sources that don't confirm their bias. And at the end result, 8 weeks of class, I have some people who really haven't learned how to do history. So I decided to make it simple. No more gun control. No, done. Sorry, get off of it. And I invariably have 3 to 4 students in every single class wanting to do gun control. And they don't do any work. They don't learn anything. Guns for, guns against. I just said no anymore. There's 3 topics. I want to see them done. And I want the people to learn about history. And the other part of it is I get people who get in there, and this really isn't biased, they get in there and they're over their heads really quick. They think they're going to have an easy powder puff course, and they're not. These are not complicated courses. They really aren't, but you have to put some effort into them. And they can't, instead of, they get to the searching for sources, they run over their head. They can't do it. They haven't mastered the skills yet. And that's what the course is supposed to be doing. So instead of taking the 3 that were there, using sources that were available and working with them, and then finding a few more, they're in some other subject totally over their head, and their grade starts dropping rapidly. I've had people drop out of the class after 4 weeks because they're completely, they just bit off more than they can chew. And this goes back to selecting a topic that's workable in the beginning. All right, so that's my little lesson on bias. I like the topics that we have. I think you all are doing very good. I'm going to be working some grading here shortly. I think you guys are just fine. Look at your sources. Don't use history.com, Wikipedia, or ThoughtCo. Those are good starting places, but you cannot use them in academic papers. I'm telling you right now, even though this is online, I don't have a red pen in my hand. You use those sources, and I'm going to be going with the point thing. They're coming off. Not going to let you do it. I'm just telling you right now. There's sources. They're embedded case studies. Use these sources and look for more. We have the Shapiro Library, academic sources. On the internet is a problem. You go out into the Bing or Google or whatever other search engine there are out there, they're really not that good. They are going to return what you want to hear in a lot of cases. When you start making some clicks, those little things start sending you the information you want to hear. Academic archives are the best to work with. You think I shared the Library of Congress stuff with you in the discussion forums for a reason, you might think. So now that I became aware of bias when I went back to college, I learned how these search engines work. And it's interesting. I'll sit back, play skeptically with them. And if I type in something a certain way, well, it'll confirm what I want to hear. But that's not what I necessarily need to hear. And when it comes to media, don't want to hear this, oh, the media is biased, all this stuff. Of course the media is biased. It always has been. Always has been, probably always will be. It's about making money for them. But don't sit there and say, well, this piece of this media source is biased, but the other one isn't. They are all biased to one degree or another. There's a nice little chart out that shows how the bias and all that stuff works. You're just going to have to live with it. Primary sources, secondary sources, history. We don't care what CNN and Fox News have to say. We'll go through and look at their journals and stuff like that. We'll pick up the site, the investigative stuff. When it comes to opinion stuff, they're written for a certain way to cater to the people that are watching these shows. Therefore, we're not going to use too many of the media sources. We want to stick to historical stuff, and we want to question what we see. We want to be skeptical. All right, that's about it on bias. I can just go on and on and on and on about bias. I think I've covered the point quite well. So with all that, y'all have a good time. Enjoy your rest of your module 3. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Have a good day.